Well, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us at the Brisbane Business Hub for our very first Fireside chat, and it's sure to be a really interesting one. My name is Sofie Formica, and joining me for the chat this afternoon is Trent Innes, who is the Managing Director for Xero, both here in Australia and across Asia. So I'm just going to give everybody a little bit of a heads up on who you are, Trent.
Oh, this is going to be scary.
Okay, you ready?
Okay, be nice.
It sounds a lot like this. If you don't already know Xero, Xero is a global accounting software platform that's cloud-based.
Great.
Excellent. So I got that bit right. What Trent really has been able to do is guide with a very strong people focus the growth of Xero to make sure that the platform is there to help small businesses thrive. Seeing the region grow exponentially over the years that you've been involved. You were named Managing Director of the Year in 2017 by CEO Magazine.
True.
Yep.
Not sure how, but true.
And I think that was really a testament to this being able to grow this business and have this next level service across all aspects of the business. The subscriber base in Australia is now over 500,000.
Over 900,000.
Okay, well, closer to 1 million, and globally over 2 million.
Well over 200.
And I did tell him that I am one of those subscribers. I do use Xero for my small business. Under your watch, though, you've seen the position of that company now grow to be one of Australia's top 100 listed companies. And when you and I were chatting earlier, I said that I did read that when Xero listed on the ASX, the analysts were not very kind. They said that Xero had its name to match its revenue.
They did. We're now, I think we're in the top 20 ASX now in terms of market cap, so there you go. They might have got that wrong.
You're definitely having the last laugh on that one. But certainly what you've been is incredibly passionate about using the insights that you're being able to garner from the data that you now are able to capture through Xero's platform to help policymakers make some informed decisions when it comes to small businesses.
Correct.
And with that, Trent last year launched Small Business Insights, which is one of the things that we're really going to focus on today. I think that we all know that data can now be a very powerful tool when it comes to not only driving business, but in helping driving the policy to support the businesses. Now, I do love that Trent, like every one of us in the room, has been impacted by this year. In fact, probably more so than others. But one of my very favourite stories was that even if you're Managing Director of the Year, 2017, when your daughter has an exam, you're the one that ends up in the car doing your Zoom classes because she's in the house.
I got kicked out when she was doing exams. That is a true story. I had to sit in the car out the front of the house and do Zoom calls because she wouldn't let me inside because I'd make too much noise, apparently.
Okay, that's just making sure that you know exactly where your place is inside.
I know where my place is. Outside, apparently.
Amazing, though, that like all of us this year, you've not only been able to maintain your position, but grow the position of Xero. Give us a bit of an oversight of sort of what the last 8 months has been for you personally and for the business.
So I've been reflecting on this a lot, actually. I've been asked, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is my first live event that I've done since the 15th of March, which ironically was actually in Noosa. And at that stage, I knew there was something going on because I look after our Asia office as well, and we'd actually shut our Asia offices down pretty much at the end of January. At that stage, I wasn't really sure, or wasn't really convinced how much of an impact it was going to have in Australia, and I think we were all like that at that stage. And I remember leaving at a Maroochydore airport, flying back to Melbourne on that 15th. I did my session and then pretty much went straight to the airport, and there was 2 people sitting in hazmat suits on the plane out of Maroochydore, and then I thought that it clicked to me and I went, I think there's actually something pretty seriously going on now. And got back to Melbourne, and pretty much on that Monday we started talking to the staff, and on the Wednesday we shut all our offices down in Australia, and they've pretty much, most of them have been shut since then. We're open to some extent in Brisbane, some extent in Sydney and Perth and Adelaide these days, but Melbourne's still well and truly shut. But it's been an interesting year. I think from a leadership perspective, it's been super interesting. There's definitely no management or leadership books out there about how to manage during a pandemic. There's never been anything like that before, and I don't think anyone who said they've planned for something like this was probably not telling the truth, because you wouldn't expect to shut every office down at one stage and move your entire workforce to remote working.
Have you been taking notes? Are we going to see the first Trent Innes Volume 1?
I suspect there'll be a plethora of books coming out this Christmas on how to manage during a pandemic or something similar of that nature, I would have thought. But I think it's been a real test of leadership. Ironically, I've actually found it quite invigorating in a strange way. I think it's made us actually focus on the real stuff that's really important, and all the other noise we've kind of got rid of. And that's really about making sure your people are safe and secure and they're set up to be successful. I think that's the number one thing. making sure you're doing the best possible thing you can for your customers at that time. And also, you got to make sure your business navigates its way through that as well.
You did mention Melbourne, and I can't let that slip by. He somehow managed to find himself moving to the Sunshine Coast in August, so he's even smarter than he looks on paper.
Yeah, now I'm trying to find that balance. So I'm trying to find that balance of fitting in up here with a bit of a tan, but not having too much of a tan that when I'm on Zoom calls back to Melbourne, I look like I'm living in Queensland. It's a balance.
I don't remember what the last figures were, but tens of thousands of Melburnians have found themselves moving over the border and probably will end up staying.
Oh, there was a true reason behind it. So basically my wife and son got trapped up here when the border shut, and so they were up here. And I was down in Melbourne with my two older daughters, and so eventually I eventually moved up here, which was always our plan. We're actually planning on moving up here full time at some stage, but I did do 2 weeks of hotel quarantine at Ridges in Fortitude Valley, so I've gone through that experience. You
were able to work through that entire time, and I would love to just go back to that, touching on the fact that, you know, while there were so many businesses, and you've got some figures to tell us exactly how small to medium businesses have fared during this time, Xero yourselves, though, have seen incredible growth.
Yeah, look, we have seen growth. It has been different in different regions. So some regions have been impacted way harder. And I think, you know, I speak to a lot of our teams in the UK and the US, and I think it's very hard for us to comprehend how hard they're doing it over there. And when you start, you know, when you see the case numbers in Melbourne got to 700 odd at one stage, 700 or 800 odd, which was really high. But then you look at some of the overseas numbers and then you're talking 50, 60, 70,000 a day, which is just hard to comprehend.
For those who might not be really familiar with Xero, give us sort of the elevator pitch.
So elevator pitch, so you summed it up pretty well before. So it's basically small business accounting in the cloud, and it's a bit more than that. It does a bit more than accounting, it's a few other things as well. And it's very much democratized accounting right down to the small business level, but it's actually a global platform as well. So we've got customers in over 180 countries around the world now. Doesn't mean we have actual physical presence in all of those. Company was originally started in New Zealand back in 2006 by a guy called Rod Drury, and we've been in Australia since 2009 and listed on the ASX.
So your background is as an accountant.
I am an accountant.
You know, when we talk about tech and disruption, you know, it was one of the first professions where everybody went, well, you know, accounting is going to be really disrupted by technology. And that always, disruption always brings great opportunity, and that's clearly where Xero comes into it. How did you end up finding yourself working with the platform?
So I actually knew the founder, so I'd known him for a long time. So my background, I did start my career as an accountant, but I didn't do it for very long, ironically. And now, given what I do now, but I actually found my way into technology and worked for a number of technology companies, but always in business application software. So it's always been my passion. And I actually, it's going to sound very geeky, but I genuinely love when you combine accounting and technology together and actually help people better understand their businesses. There's something quite cool about that. And we're in a really interesting journey right now as we've been digitizing the economy, that small business now has better access to technology than big business does, and they can roll it out faster and quicker with more choice. And so small business is in a pretty unique position in a lot of ways. And I'm not downplaying how hard it is to be a small business, because it is, but in terms of their ability to do reach, it's quite phenomenal. And there's a lot of doom and gloom out there at the moment. We'll touch on some numbers a little bit later, but the flip side of that, there's some small businesses at the moment that are absolutely booming out there at the moment. I spoke to one this morning, funny enough, who makes lollies, candy lollies. You know the ones where you used to walk past the window and they do it on the big tray and they roll it out?
And they can look like a heart in the middle.
So I spoke to the founder of that this morning. His business is in the Rocks in Sydney. When COVID hit, all his business used to come from cruise ships. No cruise ships, no traffic through the Rocks. His business went from what it was to zero instantly.
Pardon the pun.
Yeah, exactly. You're pardon the pun, without an X. But his daughter, who is 17, said, well, we should do a TikTok on rolling out that. And so they did a TikTok on rolling this out, put it online, and it reached 2.3 million people, 2.3 million views, and went viral. They now sell out in 10 minutes. So they do a batch once a week, and in 10 minutes it's gone globally. And 80% of their sales are overseas, and they never had an overseas market before that. And it's just gone bang, and they sell out every single day.
Probably to the same people who would have been on the cruise ship.
Yeah, I've spoken to lots of businesses that have actually done. I spoke to someone the other day that sells online sheets, and they've gone from having, you know, I think they had one employee, they've now got 24 employees during COVID. And so there are some businesses that are actually booming.
You mentioned agility. Obviously, the technology is what really helps a small business be agile.
I think that's part of it. I mean, part of it's always going to be mindset and drive and ambition. So there's always a human element to it, but I think the technology allows you to be global, even though you're small. You can be big even when you're small. I think that's the big difference at the moment. And I think what we've really found is that what's happened now is technology, in some industries, people understood the value of that and they'd implemented it because it made sense to their business. Whereas now I think it's kind of gone from the people that hadn't seen the benefit of that, had to pivot onto technology to survive in some of the states of Australia. But instead it's kind of gone from a nice to have to a have to have. Not just from a compliance perspective, but actually how do you attract new customers on the platform? How do you actually engage with your current customers when you can't see them in real life?
Before we move into some of those business insights, you mentioned the growth of Xero, and one of the things that I think has really stood out, certainly to me in looking at being a customer, a consumer, and also just observing, is that you would never think that an accounting software platform would have such a personality. How did the brand story of Xero originate?
So it really comes back to the founder. So the third employee of Xero was a brand person. And so a guy called Phil actually came in and he was responsible for the brand, right from the way, the look and feel of the product, all the way through to the brand that you see externally. So Rod invested really heavily in brand all the way from day one.
And really non-traditional, like to use social media in the early days.
Yeah. And he was always very available. I'm always very available as well. I always talk to people online through social media. I think it's just part of where we are now. But also, just from a brand perspective, it was all about how do you actually make accounting cool and fun. And so they're always challenging that, and that's why the beautiful accounting came from in the original days, because you actually can make accounting beautiful. And historically, small businesses didn't want to do accounting because it was debits and credits. Most people, unless you go into business to be an accountant, most people don't go into business to do accounting. And unfortunately, it's a byproduct of running a business. And so Rod's vision was to always make it as easy as possible. And you said before about disruption. Ironically, the accounting industry is busier than it's ever been because they're actually, once again, through technology, historically, accounting as an industry was very much a local suburb business. Most people dealt with their accountant in their local suburb, in the local group of shops. And that still happens to a degree now, except there's now a lot of them are purely online, don't have any physical presence, and actually engage with clients everywhere. And so it's definitely, and so you can now go and find someone that has an expertise for your business.
As you build that brand, you also obviously build a community and the trust that comes around it. So when you have events like this year, and then all of a sudden you're looking towards your software platform in conjunction with your accountant to help you navigate the complexities of the changes that were happening, was that something that was a challenge for your team as well?
It was actually fascinating. So there's probably a few answers to that question. I can answer that in a few different ways. When COVID first hit, going back to before, obviously our workforce all went remote really, really quickly. And it's not as, we've always had the ability to work remotely, so our people can work from home if they choose to, or work remotely, and that's always been something they're able to do. Telling people they have to work from home is a very different thing. And so that actually is very different than saying you could work from home if you choose to work from home. And how do you actually, become productive when you might be either, you might be living by yourself. We had people living with their parents trying to explain to them what they actually do for a living, which can be quite interesting because what they really do and what their parents think they do can be quite different. My dad still thinks I'm an accountant, ironically. We had people with young children, childcare age, which is just, I really feel for them. And then you had people doing homeschooling. And so hats off to our teachers, by the way, too. We've suddenly realised, I think, how hard that job is as well, because I definitely homeschooled my 10-year-old for a while, and that was not an easy task. But what we found is our people really rallied behind the challenge. And so JobKeeper is an example. So when JobKeeper got announced, and we actually got the details from the ATO late on a Thursday afternoon before Easter, before Good Friday. And we had a couple of weeks to build something that we would have probably taken months and months to build, because we had to build the JobKeeper eligibility test and the actual processing of JobKeeper into the product. And so we would normally want to test that to the nth degree before we release things, because you don't want to get people's pays wrong. If you ever want to get a lot of people upset on social media, getting their pays wrong is a really easy way of doing that. So you don't mess around with people's pays. But we had to do that really quickly. But the team really rallied, and they worked the whole way through Easter, and they rolled something out in a couple of weeks that would have normally taken months because they had to do it. And they actually got real satisfaction out of it. And we use a product called Office Vibe internally, which measures the health and welfare of our people. And they do a survey once a week. It never replaces having real conversations with them, but when you've got 800 odd staff, you get to a stage where at a macro level, you need to kind of see how people are feeling, and they can give us anonymous feedback through that as well, or even they can write their name down if they want to as well. But all of our metrics went up, and so they actually felt real purpose and value, and so it actually went up, and so I was quite surprised by that, and it's stayed pretty level since then.
You've got with you some COVID insights. I think that this is probably one of the things you're most passionate about at the moment, how you take the data that you're able to aggregate through having the subscriber base that you do and actually do something worthwhile with it. You said you actually went down to Parliament and you walked You knocked on doors.
I did. That was a couple of years ago, actually. That was just to sort of get a bit of a sense about how they made decisions around investments into small business. So I was just trying to understand a little bit about how they actually made those sort of decisions. And
were you surprised at the lack of awareness?
No, look, I think there's a lot of people trying to do good things. I actually think most people try and do it with good things, but they just didn't have up-to-date insight. So they're relying a lot on data from the ABS, which is quite a small sample set, really, when you think of small business. So if you get 30,000 people through a survey out of somewhere between 2.3 to 3 million small businesses in Australia, it's a very small sample set, and it's quite out of date as well. They listen to a lot of the elected ministers will actually listen to their constituents as well, get information from there, but no one really had a real-time pulse on what was going on. So that was what we tried to do. So it's called Xero Small Business Insights, and it was probably the first aggregated anonymous view in almost, basically almost in real time. It's kind of 4 to 6 weeks out of date. It gives us an insight into what's happening in the small business economy in Australia.
Take it away.
There's lots of interesting things. So you can, if you're actually interested, there's Xero Small Business Insights. If you actually Google that, you'll find it. There's a lot of data in this pack, hence why I actually brought it with me, because I can't remember all of it. But I think the key thing is just to say, from the very beginning, obviously when COVID hit in March, small business was hit twice as hard as the overall business economy in Australia. So it dived about, so we were hovering at around, at a all up Australia view, about 5.5%, 6% growth year over year. And it dropped to minus 12% pretty much in 3 weeks. It just went boom. And the industries that were hit the hardest were arts and recreation, hospitality, those that were impacted predominantly by lockdown, and people didn't have a chance to pivot straight away. The one pleasing thing though, it has actually gradually increased back up. And if you take Victoria out, which is an anomaly, we can touch on that separately, as at the end of September, we're actually back at 5.2% positive growth again in the small business economy. So it's very probably hard to see that, but you can actually see such a dramatic drop, and it has actually come back. The other one we look at is jobs. And so from a jobs perspective, what we've actually seen is we saw an 11.9% drop in jobs as well, pretty much as soon as it happened. And one of the challenges for small business is they have very few levers they can pull when things go bad. And so the biggest one they pull is casual jobs. And so that was actually what happened, because people went into, depending on what industry you are, went into some sort of free fall and had to pull the lever on casual jobs, unfortunately. That has recovered, but it's still 3.9% down on where it was pre-COVID. So we've still got work to do. So that's a lagging indicator behind economic growth. So we've actually got positive growth, but employment hasn't come back yet. And so there's you could draw a number of conclusions from that, but I think part of it is there's probably a bit of a lack of confidence out there at the moment still from small business owners saying, I'm going to bring someone back on board. I'm not really sure how this is going to go, or they're actually working much harder themselves at the moment as well. And so, I'm really conscious about what is that actually doing to them and their ability, to their mental health and so on, if they're actually working much harder than they probably have historically. But being someone who's actually been in Victoria and been in Queensland during COVID, it's a very different feel up here. Victoria was absolutely decimated. It was basically a ghost town. I drove through the city one day and it was like just a ghost town. Whereas I got up here and I couldn't believe when I walked out of hotel quarantine, I could go and see a game of football. So you've actually managed it really, really well up here. I mean, although Carlton lost, unfortunately, but I did go to that game the day I got out of quarantine. They got thrashed, actually. But.
These insights, what are you hoping, Trent, that we will see moving forward, given that, when you mentioned the levers and you mentioned the support, everybody's looking to see what happens come March as things continue to change and JobKeeper continues to be eased off?
I think the key thing is what's found though, as soon as we can actually get back to some level of normality and people can actually go about their normal way of work, and so they can actually go order from a cafe, they can go to the restaurant, it actually rebounds really, really quickly. So we actually have the ability as well to compare this in cross country, which gets really interesting. So no one's ever been able to do that in real time. So we look at Australia, the UK and New Zealand, and each government sort of dealt with it in a similar way, but quite a different way. So New Zealand went much harder into lockdown from day one. They went to stage 4 instantly. So when I said our revenue dropped 12% and recovered, a couple of percent straight after that, New Zealand dropped 40%. In small business revenues dropped to 40% basically overnight. But their employment stayed up because they actually rolled out their equivalent of JobKeeper a bit quicker. The UK, on the flip side, it dropped down to about 20% and hasn't recovered. And so because they're still so impacted by the health situation there, they're actually staying quite low. But I am very positive to say it does bounce back. It has looked like it's bouncing back very quickly.
What has been probably the one thing that people ask you most often when they're talking to you about how they might manage the recovery themselves?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. I think people are just looking for a sense of confidence, and I think that's probably what the government stimulus gives them to a degree. So a little bit concerned as that starts to roll off what that actually means. But most small business owners are just looking for a sense of confidence that things are going to kind of be okay, and that's kind of hard. That's hard to give.
I was about to say the only thing we can be certain about is that we can't be certain of anything.
No, but the data doesn't lie, and the data actually shows some really interesting insights that it does bounce back.
As a company, what has Xero learnt during this time, and has it changed the way that you as a company are dealing with potentially other disruptions that might come your way?
I think we've learned that it forces you, with scenarios like this, force you to get really focused on what's really, really important on the real basics, and also focus on what you can control, not what you can't control. And so I think it's really important actually to do that. And there's a lot of things outside of your control. So now you can't control, how do you control the health scenario? It's very difficult to do that, of course. So you just have to operate within, the confines that you can and make the best of that. The other thing it's really taught me is just to make sure we look after our people as best as we possibly can and make sure they're set up for success. The message to our people from day one was always just do the best you can. We're all going through different scenarios. You're going to miss a meeting from time to time because your kids are screaming, or you need to do a maths test with them, or whatever it might be. But you just got to do the best you can. You
articulated in an interview that I read what I think so many of us believe, and that is that if anything, this year has really shown us all that there is no differentiation between your work life and your home life. There's just sort of this melding that happens, and never more so than this year.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you say that. So we used to always say we wanted to spend more time working at home so we get our work-life balance right. And ironically, when everyone had to work from home, we completely buggered that up. And so I think we all realised, hey, we actually don't want to be at home. We actually want to get back. I think I had this view that working from home was there was no one else in the house, and I was actually working from home, and it was kind of going to be nice and quiet. The reality wasn't that at all. And I'll tell you a funny story if you want to know. This is, I've done a lot of Zoom calls and a lot of interviews on Zoom over the last couple of months, and I was doing one in my house a couple of weeks ago, just up the coast here, and I was talking to an amazing small business owner about how they survived during COVID, and it was, the interview was going really well. And it was sometimes when you interview, it was humming. When it's going, we were in a great mood, and in the background, in a window in the distance, I could see this jet fighter plane going across the sky, and it kind of caught my eye, and I just saw it go, and then the boom comes about, probably 10, 30 seconds after that. So it boomed. And my son comes running up from downstairs, and I already told him, don't come in while I'm interviewing. He comes running upstairs, he goes, "Did you hear the jet, Dad?" And I said, I'm going, go away. And then he puts his head in front of the screen and goes, "Who's that?" And it's like, it was right in the middle of the best questions I've ever asked. She'd nailed her answer. And so we actually left it in. We actually left it in the video because it was like, I just said at the end of it, this is the year we're in, so let's own it.
Absolutely. I don't think that you'd be alone in that scenario whatsoever. We talked about the future of work and what that might look like, and obviously that there are going to be some changes that, regardless of the health issues, a lot of people are going to want to keep. Does that mean that when it comes to building a new tech business, you have to incorporate these new ideas into leadership models?
Yeah, I think so. I think leadership's changing quite dramatically, and I think even if you look at the workforce that's coming through, we've got a very young workforce, and so they're very, they're very driven, but they're also very socially astute. They're very opinionated, which is actually a good thing. So actually, we empower our people to actually be able to speak up. I think part of one of the things I always think about, over my career, the word diversity has always come up a lot as well, diversity, inclusion, and I don't think it fully clicked to me a couple of years ago what that really means. I'd love to say, we're getting filmed, I probably shouldn't say that, but I always knew it was really important, but it never really, really clicked. And because we look after small business by its very nature is the most diverse workforce you'll find, because by their nature they're diverse. And we have to build product and support product for a diverse customer base. And so how do you do that if you don't have a diverse workforce? You can't. You actually can't understand your customers if you actually don't have a diverse workforce yourself. And it was kind of like a light bulb. It was probably a couple of years ago. It was a light bulb moment for me. So I think the workplace is definitely changing. And I think the way that we look to hire and it's about hiring the best talent wherever they may be, if it suits your business model, I think going forward. And we truly believe that because we're just trying to find the best talent we possibly can.
The same way Brisbane City Council has created this business hub to be able to do exactly that, to support small businesses, to be a resource for whatever assistance might be available. You've done a very similar thing for the Xero community. and to create resources that are online for people to be able to access this inclusion and this idea of creating community, it seems like it's, you know, a common thread.
Yeah, it's kind of that's our inside out philosophy. So we kind of like to see the culture of our business go out towards our customers and our community so they can actually see what we're like. And so I get amazed. People meet us sometimes and meet people from Xero and go, they were just like what you said they were going to be online. I get amazed that people actually think that's not going to be the case. But it is true. They are, and that's very much, we're very big on purpose, values and behaviours. I don't like talking about culture a lot because culture is kind of an output. You can either have a positive culture or a negative culture, but it's an output of all those other things that actually makes that up. If you just focus on the culture piece, you're kind of missing what actually makes that up, and I think that's really important.
One of the things that I love too, and I don't know if I'm alone with this, I didn't realise that one of the newest sort of positions that has been created for businesses who know that their brand is one of the most important assets that they have is the head of reputation. Yep. And you have 2 years ago?
Yeah,
two years ago, you have now a head of reputation who sits separate to marketing and comms and PR.
Yeah, they do. They do. That's a very true story. And in fact, we had an example today. So somebody altered one of our billboards today quite dramatically, and that person swung into action about that as well. I won't say what they changed the wording to because it was actually a bit offensive, but that actually happened today, and so we actually had someone managing that for us today.
Isn't that a great idea? Did you also notice that Xero were on the sidelines last night for the State of Origin? Did you see the brand placement?
I've got hats off to our marketing team.
Who would have thought that an accounting software platform would be sideline State of Origin?
What was fascinating, we actually bought the rights to advertise on the AFL and the NRL before COVID hit. And it was, I remember I was talking to our marketing team saying, I'm not sure that's a great idea. They said, no, it's where people are going to start watching. COVID hit and all of a sudden everyone watched online sport. And so it absolutely boomed. So it was actually a bit of marketing genius. So I probably owe her a pay rise at some stage.
Now you said you ended up finding yourself here because of COVID. You've spent some time on the Sunshine Coast. Can I officially share that you're going to be a permanent Queenslander?
It's definitely the aim. So I've been coming up here a long time. So my grandparents had a house up here when I was a little kid. So I've been coming here for a long, long time. And so I don't know how, but I was born in Melbourne, but definitely the plan is to spend more time up here. And there's a thriving, I'm up on the Sunshine Coast, and there's a thriving ecosystem of tech entrepreneurs up there that I've met over the last couple of weeks. And I'm really amazed who actually resides up there. You wouldn't know who's walking around in their shorts and thongs in that area, which is actually a really pleasing thing to see, that there's actually some really exciting stuff going on in Queensland.
Yeah, there is. Does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask of Trent while we've got a little bit of time? Yes?
Working from home here to stay or a hybrid?
Oh, it's hard. So I think it depends heavily on your role and what's suitable. I mean, I'll be honest, I miss the office. I miss the office more than I thought I would. And so I've been in the Brisbane office today. And I went there a couple of weeks ago, and that was the first time I'd been in an office since the middle of March. I choose not to have a desk, so I actually don't have a desk in our office. And the reason for being that is I like working in our common areas. I like working in the kitchen areas and so on. And it's not that I don't want this to sound creepy, but I actually like overhearing conversations. It gives me a real pulse on how the business is running and what people are doing. And I've really missed that. I've had to kind of force that, and it doesn't feel very natural when I randomly drop into people's team meetings, and so I get set up and I drop in, but I'm sure it's not the same as if I'm just overhearing a conversation in the background that I can interject and have a bit of conversation, hopefully add some value. I found that a lot more difficult during COVID. I think I've had to be much more deliberate around what I do in a remote environment. I think it's about giving people choice and their ability to actually do it. I don't think you say you have to work from home or you have to work remotely or you have to work in an office. If it makes sense, I think it's about giving them the optionality to do that. I think historically most of the businesses that weren't supportive of doing that is because they were scared of losing control. Whereas the reality, I might be naive, but I think most people go to work to actually have a good day and go home and say, I had a great day at work today and I was productive and I did something, right? And my experience today has been if you empower people and you actually set them free and let them be clear about what they need to achieve, but if you empower them to do that, most of them will pay you back in spades.
Doesn't that come down to leadership and managerial style though?
Leadership, I think, yeah. Management and leadership are quite different. We could talk about that for hours. But.
Anyone else have a question? Yes.
The holiday season is upon us, and it's always an interesting time of year, even outside of the pandemic. But given what's happened this year, what do you think is sort of planned, or how do you think we'll react in terms of the holiday season and sales and businesses winding up or down?
So I think it'll be ho, 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 it's an online Christmas, I reckon. I reckon online sales are going to go through the roof. And so I think, so we're already starting to measure that and looking at, we look at retail sales already, but we're looking at definitely a retail from an online and more of a physical presence. But I think online will go absolutely nuts this year. I also think we'll probably see, I think retail numbers will be up, and I suspect because a lot of people haven't travelled this year, they can't go overseas. There's a lot of people sitting on cash at the moment, which they probably haven't done. Some of the people have been clearly impacted by losing jobs, unfortunately, but there's a lot of government stimulus out there as well. So I actually think the retail figures will be strong, is my gut feel. Interest rates are low. The other thing is probably just tourism as well, and that'll all come down if the borders open back up, I think, as well.
Yes.
That's my prediction, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, Trent, you mentioned leadership a number of times, a bit of a buzzword during COVID, but if we bring it home to Xero, what do you think has been some of the permanent changes in terms of how you guys as an exec team lead, but both as a team, work as a team, but if I was a staff member, walked down through the food chain, what would I have noticed differently? You think how you guys now operate versus how you did?
So I actually don't think we've changed that much because we're pretty much, our workforce is remote anyhow, and so we have offices. So I sit on the Xero leadership team, which is our global leadership team. We're spread around the world. So we're not in one location. We're quite unique. Most C-level teams operate out of one location. We don't, and never have. We have someone in Singapore, we've got people in the UK, people in the US, people here. So we've always operated like that. I think what you would probably hear from our team though is we've probably over-communicated to them. So we've probably communicated to them more than ever. And so our global CEO, Steve, has been very visible the whole way through this. I've been very visible. We always do, we do a kick-off meeting every Monday, but I did a lot of videos. I did a lot of online messages, especially in the early days, just to let people know that we were listening to them, that we were trying to do the best we can to try and support them through this. So it was just probably over-communication, I would have thought. It's a big one.
Yes, the last one.
Thanks, Trent. Interested in your view on red tape. So
Yep.
a lot of what you have to do at Xero is take government regulation and mix it through it so businesses can actually be compliant. So I'm interested in your view on, is there a lot of ridiculous red tape? You look and say, why that could be so much easier?
Yep.
And how does Australia compare internationally with the other jurisdictions that you're looking at?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I actually sit on the deregulation committee for the removal of red tape. It's actually not called exactly that, but it's but it's fundamentally is that. So I actually sit on I sit on a group with government around that. So the average small business in Australia spends just over 10 hours a week on compliance work, and so that's and interesting enough, a lot of the forms they fill in are the same forms that BHP fill in as well. So the forms are actually fundamentally almost the same, which is kind of a bit out of whack. But it is getting better. So the government is digitising as quickly as they can, and that is the goal. That is the way to get through this, is actually digitising as many services as we possibly can. Because at the moment there's a whole lot of friction that sits between the business owner and the government that they need to actually provide information to. And so basically you're translating data from looking like this to having to look like that, or consolidating it together. And it's when you have to do that, that's where it creates friction. And that friction is the bit where it takes a lot of time getting into the right formats and so on. So a lot of that's getting around. So things like last year, obviously things like single touch payroll were put in. We've got e-invoicing starting to roll out now. We've got open banking coming through, which starts to flow of information down in a more consistent way. So there is a lot of activity going on in digitising our economy. We are behind some countries, but we're way ahead of other countries as well. So we're definitely probably not the best, but we're by no means the worst. And in fact, the ATO has been pretty great for us to work with. We actually worked really hand in hand with them in trying to streamline all of those processes to actually help small business be able to provide the information they need in a much more seamless way.
Is it easy enough to be able to sell the security story to a lot of small businesses who maybe weren't necessarily, who have been going for a while, who may be older or family-run businesses who might be a little reticent from this idea that everything is now on a cloud platform?
We used to get asked a lot about security, but not so much anymore. So very rarely do we get asked about security. And I think a lot of that is because we've got to make sure that we sort of take that role in trying to help people protect themselves to a degree. So the biggest challenge in security is the person sitting in the chair in front of the keyboard or on the device. That's still the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
And so it's more about education than anything else, and then trying to do as much as we can. So we made the decision a couple of years ago to roll out two-factor authentication for every user in Australia. So you have to have two-factor authentication for our customers. I know sometimes people complain that's a bit of a pain point for them because they've got to have two things, and a few people are nodding. But I remember making that decision because it was the right thing to do, because people are at risk otherwise, and you're dealing with people's financials and private information. So it was the right thing to do. So sometimes you've got to make those big calls, which you think are the right things to do, but it will inconvenience your partner base or your customer base for a while.
I'll wrap it up by asking you one last thing, and I know I'm putting you on the spot just a little bit, but especially when it comes to SMEs, what are 3 things that you think all businesses should be doing right now?
All right, so it's a great thing. So I think first of all is having a look at so where are you heading from a digital perspective? So I think it's really important to actually understand digital. Even if you're not a digital native business, I think it's really important to understand that and where it's heading. And it's not, the word digital gets overused and misused sometimes a little bit, but it's basically about connecting you to service to actually give you time back to do stuff that you really want to do yourself. So how does that manifest itself? I think the other big one at the moment is being really conscious about the things that you can control, not the things you can't control. And I don't think it matters whether you're a small business or a big business. Look at the things that you can actually control most importantly. And the last one, if this has taught us anything, is be on top of your cash flow. Always cash is king in any business. And one of the things we found out through this and the small business insights that we've been running for a couple of years now, we always knew that about 50% of small businesses were running month to month. And so basically they only have enough cash to get them to the next month. And that was a very consistent, and it's very hard for a small business to raise working capital short term. And so quite often that comes down to relying on credit cards, which is generally not the best way to go. You'll pay for that. And so it's making sure that you actually across your cash flow.
Put your hands together, please, and join me in thanking Trent. As I mentioned, he will be staying a little longer this afternoon, so if you do have something else you'd like to pick up with him, or if there's something he mentioned you'd like to clarify, please feel free to come up and introduce yourselves. And thank you for being with us for our first afternoon here in the Brisbane Business Hub.
Thanks, Sophie.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.